Hi, my name is Sangita Kumar, and I'm the CEO and founder of Be the Change Consulting. Join me in Liberated AF, the workplace revolution. This is a podcast where we get to explore what does it take to become the organization that we want to work for. So what is that? The organization I want to work for, it supports my humanity and makes me feel like I belong. It's a place that isn't racist, it isn't extractive. It works for the boomers and the Gen Alphas. There's space for everyone to bring their genius to work. Don't we want to become that? And don't we want to create that? So I have been studying organizational dynamics for over 20 years, and I love working with teams stuck in an entrenched challenge to bring clarity to diverse perspectives and look for ways that human-centered systems. We're going to tell stories, we're going to answer questions, we're going to offer strategies on this podcast. Together, we are going to become something new. Let's go.
Hello, hello, hello. My favorite person, Sangita. How are you?
I'm so good, Fong. Good to see you.
I know. What's interesting for you listeners out there, Sangita and I used to run in every Monday morning, usually wearing kind of similar sweaters because we buy them for each other. And now that we're located on different continents, when we log on, we still kind of similarly are wearing the same thing. So if you all could just see our big ass hoops and our comfy sweaters, we're still vibing, even though there's oceans and oceans and oceans separating us.
Just shows that we are connected in many ways, not just physical space.
Yeah, in so many ways. I have this topic that's been coming up for me. So as I have I'm living in a different continent, I'm really learning so much, right? Really humble and really understanding there's so much I don't know. And I think about diversity and education here where I'm at right now in Italy and in the States. I have this question for you. When we're doing this racial equity work and when you're working with clients, do you ever think how much diversity can a place actually hold?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's a question, right? I think in equity work, if we think the value is diversity, does it mean, I think when I heard that idea, that to me paints a picture of everyone and everything under the sun and the kitchen sink should be is good. Put it all in there, and it has to it's our work to make it all work together. And is that what you thought? Maybe I'm the only one who thought like that.
Yeah. I was thinking everyone has a spot. And it's all good.
Yeah. Yeah. So as someone who's been running an organization, and when I think about organizational teams that I've been a part of, working groups, coalitions, collaboratives, I think there's a connection between the amount of diversity and the time, the systems, the structures, like the infrastructure that's in place to hold it all. And if you have, and by diversity, I think we often think I think of it in two ways. There's identity diversity, like gender diversity, racial diversity, diversity in sexual orientation, learning styles, physical ability. There's the, the more we've done this work, the more we've kind of looked at the differences in diversity that people have. It also impacts the way that they think and the way that they see the world and the way that they, make decisions, the way that they communicate, the way that they, so the more kind of identity-based diversity you have, what we're actually trying to make space for in the workplace is not people's, many cultural heritages and, things like that. It's actually the ways that having diverse lived experiences can create different kinds of thinking in a space that can be really transformative and allow us to get to ideas that are, more creative or more expansive than what traditional dominant culture thinking leads us towards, right? when the workplace culture is very limited in its diversity, the output and the outcomes, you lose creativity, right? And actually innovation, because there's more of like a normative way of thinking. But it also maybe allows for some productivity that, when people think the same way and there aren't like radically different ideas, you might be able to converge on an idea that everybody agrees on quicker. And so decision making can happen faster. And like brainstorming is actually not like, if it's not super creative and different ideas, it actually can feel more like everyone can feel more safe in it because they're seeing themselves in the ideas. And it, so it kind of lends to like a little more comfort, I think.
Can you give me an example? So, taking what you just said there, when a workplace has the limited diversity in ways of lived experiences, and then it would impact the way in which people there can make decisions together, not like, give me an example, like school settings and maybe a big organization, right? So unpack those environments based on those components that you just shared, but how much diversity can a place actually hold?
I'm thinking about one school, that doesn't have a lot of staff of color. It's mostly, white American staff. But it has a lot of kids of color. Their ideas about behavior management, like how to bring families, if you need to call a family and have like a conference, collaborate with the families to talk about student behavior to get to more academic success. I'm just looking at their ideas and they feel like very culturally bland, Like I watch them do their conferences and it doesn't feel so maybe it would look fine to me if I had not seen something else. Like it's polite, it's structured, it's, it doesn't, the depth of collaboration, I don't see a depth there. When I think about this other school, they have more families of color and staff of color, and you can just see the relationships between the families and the teachers feel more collaborative. They're more connected. People might speak in multiple languages in the meetings. Families are always bringing like a treat, for the staff when they come in to meet. And it's so like that feels very stark, right? That's like kind of a more of a good bad binary in that example. So it's not always like it's good or bad, but I think in that place, right? In that first school, I think if some of these teachers from the second school were in that school and they were like, we have a way to do family conferences that let's start with just telling a story about ourselves, or let's start with like, yeah, when we eat this cookie together and we ask the family, like, what's your recipe and where did it come from? Like they can, they might suggest things that feel very like not a good use of time, or like not even like why, like not, that's not going to get us to the end result that we're looking for. And so whether those ideas are good or bad ideas, like in that first school, because of the lack of diversity, I know that people bringing in ideas that have a more like familial relational value to it, it gets met with some hostility, or you're often the only person kind of giving ideas like that. And so then when you're the outlier, right, you can't really see that the idea it doesn't look like an innovative idea. It looks like, oh, that person is all the way over there and they're always over there. And the rest of the group, like that's where that angry person of color or whatever, kind of where that comes from. Because when one person is bringing a set of ideas from a set of values, which are coming from a set of lived experiences that are very different from the rest of the group, the ideas feel polarized. And the polarization feels like conflict. And so even if that person is not yelling their ideas, the people in that group are like, why are you bringing that hostility, into this meeting? Like, why can't you just like be easy to get along with? And so that's like an example, right? Where the diversity is actually now creating friction and that space isn't set up to hold it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's just a little way too familiar, because we've sat in a lot of places where we've supported facilitating that type of trust building, right? Where there's been such a huge gap. So then what would you suggest for that particular school? What should they start by doing?
Okay, so I'll give you an example from another space that I'm facilitating. That I think we're trying some models of like, what do you do? So I think one is well, okay, so this other group, I'll give you the example, is a neighborhood association in a neighborhood in San Francisco that is actively gentrifying right now. And so this neighborhood association, a neighborhood association is typically designed for homeowners or business owners to kind of protect the neighborhood, to keep the neighborhood vibrant or thriving. But this language, this idea of like to protect the neighborhood, it's often like coded dog whistle language of like, we're protecting it from whom, or protecting which people, right? Like whose needs are being centered. So what we did with that group, and that group is trying to create, because it's kind of in this space of gentrification, it has renters, it has a lot of like, it was a historically queer neighborhood. So lots of like, there used to be lots of low income apartments that, it was very affordable. And it attracted lots of young people, lots of, it's like a place that like folks who don't feel safe in so many other parts of the country, have come here. So now this association, this neighborhood association, even I wanted to call it a homeowner association, but it's a neighborhood association. They're like, we have all of these different identities of people, right? We have homeowners, we have business owners, we have, kind of the young straight couple who just moved in here with, that are having like bigger families. We have the, historically like these older queer people who are single or who are living in these like collective housing units, with like chosen family more than traditional families. So in that space, they're constantly, when somebody says we should put a traffic light here, or we should protest, new housing units are being built, we don't want them to be market rate housing, or we do want them to be market rate housing, right? So they're speaking from what their own identities always in that space, and they're advocating for what they want, like most of us are in meetings. They're advocating for what they think should happen, but their rationale is what would be best for me, right? From my perspective. And that is a recipe for disaster in a diverse space, because dominant culture will start to like push the directions it become like the dominant culture of the group will become the, what's it called in like water? Like there's like the momentum of the water, the current. It becomes the current, and things just kind of flow in that one direction. And so we built this model that I thought was really helpful for the group that had concentric circles. So we started by saying, who are all the identities? Who are all the stakeholders in this space? Like who is this space designed to serve? So if you think about this idea of protect, right? Who is this space supposed to protect? Who is this space supposed to serve? Who is this space supposed to help thrive? So they listed everybody. So, and they were like dog owners versus people who have kids, people who are driving like AV cars versus people who are riding bicycles. So, they kind of had all these different identities. And so then we said, okay, now who should be centered? So we wrote each thing on its own Post-it, and then we built this diagram. It was really cool, actually. I think they actually had a lot of fun doing it. So then they built this like, who of these identities, who should be centered? Who's like, so if you think about concentric circles, who's at the very middle, who's in the outer one, and then the super outer tier? Like whose interest should we, when there are competing priorities, this idea of who should we center, we are going to need a focal population map, a tool that helps us take our analysis outside of our own personal needs and really think about, the North Star of who the space should be designed for. And so we built this map, and, they made a lot of like right answers from an equity perspective. They said, oh, we should prioritize renters, people who are, unstably housed, young people. We want this to be a thriving place for young people. there needs to be space for families that are affordable and, safe, like things like that. And then, business owners are further to the outside. Property owners, landlords, tenants are further outside. And so then we tried it with a scenario. I was like, okay, so you built this map. And I know that there's that thing that happens, that performative, I'm going to vote this way. I'm going to say this is my value, but I might not actually be able to act against that value. Because when push comes to shove, I might rather have a coffee shop on that lot than a parklet for children to play, because I would rather go across the street and get coffee. So we know that's going to happen. So they made that map, and then we tried it with some scenarios, and they workshopped what actually are our values? What actually are we willing to support? And we tried it with 3 or 4 progressively complex scenarios, and they're going to keep working on it, and they're not perfect, but it helps them to see what is the diversity in the space, and how do those diversities create competing needs? And when we have the chance to influence a decision, how will we put our organizing power, behind the communities and the identities that we most want to support here? That was a lot to say, but as a tool, can you visualize that?
Yeah, I can visualize that, and I'm sitting on when you were talking about the curtain that kind of pushes people through, and I think about how every single person in that group prior to you doing the process has been socialized with white dominant thinking, right? And so there's this individualism, and it's so hard to think about others when you your whole life have been fighting for resources. Yeah. And so when come into this space, and often, we had an episode where we talk about false democracy, and often these diversity spaces are a place structured in false democracy, because you're putting a bunch of people who haven't gotten anything, and you're like, okay, what should we do? And so everyone's going to, like you said, want a piece of their own, or only look from their individual perspective. And so as I'm visualizing the Post-its and how you drew those concentric circles, it's like that muscle that was super strong that we've all been socialized to flex. You gave folks another way of building another muscle. So through every single one of the scenarios, I imagine that the participants was, even if they were leaning in a little bit to do that performative bit of going, oh shit, I should say this because this is the thing we should say. We need a traffic light instead of a coffee shop. The structure is not false, right? There's a way in which they are now seeing a little level of accountability of their own and other folks. And so, yeah, I can totally see it all. And I can only imagine, remind me the name of this group again. You called it a neighborhood association.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they're going to have to be in this practice several more times in order to make a decision that is truly going to be centering the people that's going to be most impacted, right? The folks that has been most marginalized in that community, even though they all have been. But what are the structures they need to create to start centering?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So we go back to that school, that we were talking about, that first school with that has mostly white staff and maybe has 1 or 2 people of color in it. If they made a map like that and they were like, who do we want to center in this school? And they said, families and children of color. Then what they might say, and our staff of color, maybe they would put both into the center. Then when they're in that staff meeting and you're in that brainstorming space that can tend to go toxic for if you're the one diverse person, right, in a majority one identity space, if you're the one woman in a mostly male space, if you're the one person who's hard of hearing in a space where people can hear really well, it's a lot of labor for that one person. What they can do then is, if they've decided that's who they want to center, they could start their brainstorming by saying, let's hear from this person, the one person who's closest to the identities that we most want to center. No pressure. You don't have to go first, but let's start by hearing your ideas. Or let's all brainstorm, and then let's start by, a speaking order that matches your priority population map in your conversations. It can start to interrupt what feels like a divergent and unproductive idea, if you connect it with your focal map and the identity of the person who's sharing that happens to match your focal map tool, I've seen it over and over. It shifts the analysis from like, oh, that's an outlier idea to, oh, this is an idea that's closer to populations that we most want to serve. And none of us represent those identities. And maybe it feels really different, not because it's a bad idea, but because we are used to centering one set of things and this person sees things differently. And so now we're actually structurally inviting the diversity in a productive way rather than it being there and it's just kind of like noise and chaos. So I think that's like how you would operationalize that tool.
Well, I was also thinking, if we're thinking about that same scenario of that predominantly white school, all white staff, right? And so in this scenario, you were giving strategies if there was maybe 1 or 2 person of color and like what you can do to ensure that the labor is not put on them, right? Some process steps. I was also thinking that if that school didn't have the 1 or 2 people of color, how they could start is they could start off by saying, let's start with what we don't know, right? So like visibilizing that there. And so then being able to go through that brainstorm to say, actually, we don't know how to engage Black families. Actually, we don't have resources here to do that. So then what is it that we will need to do to even start that versus like creating all these strategies that are not authentic and is not centering the people who need it, but more so centering our comfort, like that over politeness, like all those different things in which there's a value set that people are holding there too. But as we've seen, it could do a lot of harm too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I have one more thing I think that is like that I'm seeing a new group, a group that's forming now. And it's a really cool project. It's happening in San Francisco where we're doing some organizing work to reinstate the San Francisco Dyke March, which is like a very cool historic thing that's happened in San Francisco for many years. And it hasn't happened over the past 5 years because the group broke apart because of infighting. And really it was because of like anti-Black, anti-trans sentiments. And so now this group is starting again. And, I can just see we've had our first facilitated meeting. There's a lot of diversity in this space. It's all dykes. So in some ways, I'm not a dyke, and I'm constantly like, why are you letting me facilitate this? And they're definitely like, no, we need allies. There's like a labor for allies in this, like we want someone not in our community because it's super insular. And in that still though, there's all these different thinkings, there's like indigenous folks, there's trans folks, there's BIPOC folks, there's older people, there's people who've been here since like, who were part of the very first, like it's like history is in the room. And we started to hear just like divergent thinkings about politics, political identity. And what I think in a space like that, right? So again, like if we're like, how do you welcome diversity and contain it? Because at some point, if it becomes too activated and we start to focus too much on the places where we're different, we won't get anything done. And so what we're going to share with this group, and we're going to introduce it next week, we'll see how it goes, is just kind of the organizing rigor of like we have to have a discipline in here. We get to acknowledge there are places that some of the people in this group don't agree. I think like Israel-Palestine is one place where it's already activated in that group. There are people who are like, I'm Jewish and I see myself as a Zionist. And then there's people who are like, we are anti-Zionists. And even that term, right? It's like this clashing language. It's going to create a level of conflict in that space that will not make it productive. And so in a space like that, what we're going to try to do is say, we want to recognize that we are diverse in our thinking about, we have a lot of common ground in many places and in many ways. And there are some aspects of us that we don't see eye to eye. And this space is not the space to deal with our divergent thinking on every topic. And if we start to if we over dial into those areas where we know we're diverse, we will break our culture. We can't hold it. We don't have the resources or the time to heal through, these like really big conflict spaces, because this is not a space for that. And so I don't know if that will work, but I think sometimes when there's diversity and we know we can't deal with it, it might help to name it and to invite people to say, like, let's focus on the places where we are in solidarity, and not overly admire or agitate ourselves in the places where we know we're going to end up in conflict. And nobody wants to facilitate through that. People will lose people. People will stop coming.
I think that's such a lovely start, because I think people would quickly even say that, why couldn't we be in a space where we can have these conversations? And then, but if we held that particular thought with that, there's an opportunity for us to find the places in which we are different, and then also look for the place that we're the same in this particular context of what we need to decide and where we need to be. And then when we have more time and resources, and I like how you said, to heal through this, we can meet those, right? So even having that as a resource to say, because if not, it's again, we've been socialized to puff out our chests and to fight and to name the things in which we don't have. And it would be really challenging. And I'm just thinking of this particular project that you're working on, and the diversity in the space and what magic can come out of that particular powerful group with so many diverse yet similar probably values and lived experience, and what can come from that. I wonder, would that be something that you would, I don't know if you do this already, is that during your discovering your intake call with organizational leaders or administrators, is for you to ask them, like, how much diversity do you think your group can hold? Or how much diversity do you think you can hold?
That's great.
I don't know. And so we would love to hear how this topic is landing for you all. As Sangita shared the lovely in so many ways in which she's bringing this insight into all the different spaces that she's facilitating. We thank you so much for joining in. Until next time, Sangita and I will be joining virtually in warm sweaters and big earrings. Toodles, y'all.
Bye, everybody.
We hope this conversation provided helpful insight and inspired you to create a more inclusive and liberated workplace. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. Your support makes a huge difference in helping us reach more listeners like you. We love to hear your thoughts on today's topic. Connect with us on social media and drop a comment. You can find all the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.